Manny Pacquiao observed the Manila sunset through his office window, his fingers lightly touching the scars on his knuckles. Each mark told a story. Each scar revealed a chapter of his journey, from the poor streets of General Santos City to the world's greatest rings. The champion in 8 different weight categories had built a legacy that transcended sport. For millions of Filipinos, he wasn't just a boxer, he was hope incarnate, a symbol that it was possible to overcome the most severe adversities. His childhood of extreme poverty had been left behind, but his memories remained vivid. Pacquiao remembered the nights he slept on the dirt floor, sharing a piece of bread with his siblings. He recalled how he dropped out of school in 6th grade to help his mother, Dionysia, who raised her children alone after the separation. At 14, he ran away to Manila with only the clothes on his back and a seemingly impossible dream: to become a professional boxer. Now, decades later, his eyes contemplated framed photographs adorning the office walls. Each captured a moment of glory in the ring, victories over legends like Oscar de la Hoya, Miguel Cotto, and Eric Morales. World titles that no one imagined a skinny, malnourished young man from the Philippines would conquer. But among the trophies and accolades, something deeper troubled his mind. Behind the characteristic smile that enchanted crowds, Pacquiao carried invisible scars. Scars left not by opponents' blows, but by words, looks, and attitudes. He knew well the bitter taste of prejudice. He had been called a disposable fighter, just another Asian, second-rate boxer. For years, he had to repeatedly prove his worth, not just for being a fighter, but for being an Asian fighter in a sport dominated by other nationalities. The television news showed disturbing images. An elderly Asian man being pushed on the sidewalk in San Francisco. A woman attacked on the New York subway simply because of her Oriental features. Children being intimidated in schools, called virus. The pandemic had unleashed a wave of xenophobia and racism against the Asian community. A wave that grew every day, fueled by fear and ignorance. Pacquiao turned off the television, feeling a familiar pain tightening his chest. It wasn't the physical pain of blows in the ring to which he was accustomed. It was something deeper, more suffocating. It was the recognition of an injustice he knew all too well. Years ago, when he began his international career, he also faced looks of contempt, malicious comments whispered in the corners of gymnasiums, doubts about his ability based solely on his origin. In his home in Manila, surrounded by the comfort he had earned with so much effort, Pacquiao thought about the millions of Asians around the world who didn't have his voice, his platform, his recognition. He thought about the Filipino children growing up seeing those news stories, perhaps questioning their own worth in a world that seemed to reject them for the simple reason of existing. The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming, even for someone who had faced the most feared opponents inside a ring. That night, while the city slept, Pacquiao remained awake. His restless mind sought a way to respond, not with fists, but with something more lasting, more impactful. He always believed his story wasn't just about boxing, but about overcoming, about human dignity. Now, more than ever, he felt he needed to use his platform for something greater than titles and million-dollar purses. The question that kept him awake was how to transform his indignation into concrete action. It was during a human rights conference in Los Angeles that Pacquiao met Chris Soriano, a young Filipino-American with bright eyes and passionate words. Soriano had no experience in cinema, hadn't attended drama schools, nor did he have connections in Hollywood. What he had was a story, a vision, and a determination that reminded Pacquiao of his own youth. Soriano spoke about a script he had written in just 1 week, inspired by the hate crimes against Asians he had witnessed in his community. The story was simple but powerful. A young Asian boxer who, after defending an elderly man from a racist attack, finds himself challenged by a middleweight boxing champion to an unconventional fight. It wasn't just a film about sport. It was a metaphor about resistance, about finding strength in adversity, about transforming pain into purpose. Pacquiao listened attentively, recognizing echoes of his own journey in that narrative. When Soriano finished speaking, silence filled the room. He expected criticism, perhaps even laughter, After all, who was he to dream of making a film? An unknown person with no experience, no resources, trying to address such a complex issue. To his surprise, Pacquiao approached, extended his hand, and said only 3 words that would change everything. "Let's do this." The decision wasn't received with enthusiasm by his team. His advisors warned about the financial risks, about Soriano's inexperience, about how getting involved in such a politicized project could affect his public image. But Pacquiao wasn't concerned with numbers or marketing strategies. He saw something beyond, an opportunity to use cinema just as he used boxing to give voice to the invisible. The production of Almighty Zeus began at the height of the pandemic, when the film industry was practically paralyzed. There were no major studios involved, no known stars or million-dollar budgets. What existed was a small, determined team, mostly composed of Asian Americans who believed in the film's message. Many worked for free, motivated by the chance to finally tell their own stories on their own terms. Pacquiao assumed the role of executive producer, not only investing financial resources but opening doors that would normally be closed to an independent project. He used his influence to secure locations, equipment, even to convince experienced actors to participate in small roles. Behind the scenes, Pacquiao wasn't the world boxing star, but a humble collaborator who swept the set, brought coffee to the crew, and shared stories of his own experience with discrimination. The filming took place mainly on the streets of Los Angeles, in real settings where hate crimes had occurred. Authenticity was paramount. Each scene should reflect the raw reality that many Asians face daily. Soriano, directing his first film, counted on Pacquiao's patient guidance, who, although never having directed, deeply understood the power of stories to transform perceptions. The filming process was completed in record time, just 90 days from the first action to the final cut. It wasn't a perfect film in technical terms. There were continuity flaws, moments when the team's inexperience was evident. But there was something that no budget could buy: authenticity. Each frame carried the truth of those who lived the experiences portrayed. Each scene reflected not just a fictional story, but echoes of painful realities that needed to be exposed. When the first images of Almighty Zeus began to circulate, the reactions were mixed. Professional critics pointed out technical limitations, questioned the film's direct approach to racial issues, suggested that the message was too simplistic for such a complex topic. On social media, hostile comments emerged, people questioning why a fighter should get involved in politics, or claiming that Pacquiao was exaggerating the reality of hate crimes. Distribution proved to be another formidable obstacle. Major cinema chains, already cautious with the pandemic, hesitated to show an independent film on a controversial topic. Some distributors suggested changes to the final cut, asking to soften certain scenes or dilute the central message. Pacquiao remained firm. The film would be shown as it was conceived, without compromising its essence, even if that meant reaching a smaller audience. The battle for distribution continued for months, with Pacquiao using his own money to ensure the film reached the public. He rented independent movie theaters, organized screenings in community centers, universities, and even boxing gyms. When traditional doors closed, he created new paths. The determination that led him to become a world champion now propelled him in a completely different arena. Behind the apparent public tranquility, Pacquiao faced personal doubts. There were moments when he questioned whether he was using his resources in the best way, whether a film could really make a difference in a problem as deeply rooted as racism. On sleepless nights, he remembered the commentators who underestimated him at the beginning of his career, the promoters who doubted that a small Filipino could become a global attraction. Those memories renewed his conviction that the fight against prejudice, just like in boxing, is won one round at a time. The official premiere of Almighty Zeus took place in a small theater in Los Angeles on December 2nd, 2022. There was no extravagant red carpet, celebrity photographers, or limousines. Instead, the audience was composed mainly of members of the Asian American community, activists, students, and ordinary people who had been affected by hate crimes. Among them was Noel Quintana, a 61-year-old Filipino man who had been attacked on the New York subway, leaving a permanent scar on his face. At the end of the screening, something unexpected happened. The audience remained silent for several seconds before erupting into emotional applause. It wasn't applause for the cinematic quality, but for recognition. For the first time, many in that room saw their experiences portrayed without filters, without stereotypes, without the need to explain or justify their pain. Silent tears ran down faces that for so long had maintained composure amid hostility. Social media did what major distributors couldn't. They brought almighty Zeus to audiences that traditional circuits would never reach. Short videos, emotional testimonials, and discussions about the film began to go viral. Teachers used scenes as teaching material to discuss racism in the classroom. Community groups organized sessions followed by debates. The film, rejected by conventional channels, found its way through alternative routes, reaching precisely the people who most needed its message. Pacquiao observed this phenomenon with a mixture of gratitude and humility. He had learned long ago that some victories are not announced by an announcer in a lighted ring, are not celebrated with golden belts or press conferences. They are silent victories, measured by looks of recognition, by whispered thanks, by the feeling that something important was beginning to change, even if slowly. 6 months after its release, Almighty Zeus had been seen by more people than any initial projection could predict. The film found its space on independent streaming platforms, in film festivals focused on diversity, in educational programs about social justice. Specialized critics, initially skeptical, began to recognize the cultural impact of the project, highlighting how its authenticity compensated for any technical limitations. In schools in neighborhoods with large Asian populations, teachers reported subtle but significant changes. Children who previously hid, ashamed of their cultural heritage, now spoke openly about their experiences. Teenagers found in Zeus's story, and in Pacquiao's real story, models of peaceful resistance, of dignity preserved amid adversity. The film had become more than entertainment. It was a tool for healing, for identity building, for solidarity. Organizations working against hate crimes began to use scenes from the film in their awareness campaigns. Local authorities, pressured by the growing movement against anti-Asian violence, implemented new policies to protect vulnerable communities. They weren't revolutionary or instantaneous changes, but they represented important steps toward a more just and empathetic society. For Pacquiao, the true success of the film wasn't in the numbers or reviews, but in the stories that reached him. Stories of people who, inspired by the message of Almighty Zeus, found courage to report abuses, to speak out against injustices, to embrace their identities without fear or shame. In his office in Manila, he carefully kept each letter, each email, each message of thanks, a treasure much more valuable than any award or official recognition. On a quiet afternoon in Manila, away from the spotlight and crowds that marked his boxing career, Manny Pacquiao reflected on the meaning of Almighty Zeus in his own journey. Although he produced the film as a response to hatred, the process had transformed something in him as well. The boy who emerged from extreme poverty to conquer the world now understood that his true mission might be greater than breaking records or accumulating titles. Journalists frequently asked if he considered Almighty Zeus a success, expecting answers in terms of box office or awards. Pacquiao always responded with the story of a 14-year-old boy who, after watching the film at a community screening in San Francisco, had said, "For the first time, I wasn't ashamed to be who I am." For the boxing champion, there was no more significant metric of success than this simple declaration. The experience with Almighty Zeus opened doors to new projects focused on social issues. Pacquiao discovered that his voice and influence could be used to amplify stories that normally wouldn't find space in dominant narratives. It wasn't just about combating hatred against Asians, but about creating bridges of understanding between communities, about using art as a tool for social transformation. As the sun set on the Manila horizon, Pacquiao knew that his legacy would be defined not only by the blows delivered in the ring, but by the barriers he helped to break down outside it. The boy who once slept on the streets of General Santos City, dreaming of a better future, had become more than a world boxing champion. He had become a defender of human dignity, a storyteller, a builder of bridges. And that, for him, was worth more than all the championship belts he had won throughout his extraordinary career. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel.